El día de hoy empezamos la mañana con la presentación de turismo, puertos interiores e hidrovías, servicio a buques y control de la navegación. Tendremos un receso más adelante y luego finalizaremos esta sesión del día de hoy con responsabilidad social corporativa y mujer portuaria. En ese sentido, tengo el agrado de presentar a nuestro primer ponente del día de hoy, el señor Kevin Knight, del Cuerpo de Ingenieros del Ejército de los Estados Unidos, específicamente del Instituto para Recursos Acuáticos, y procederé a leer una nota biográfica en inglés. Mr. Kevin Knight is an economist with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Institute for Water Resources, and some of Kevin's responsibilities include developing handbooks as tools, as well as conducting training in the planning of water resource projects. In addition, Kevin manages the Corps Transport Systems Program and provides support to the National Academy's Transportation Research Board, the Interagency Committee on the Maritime Transportation System, and recently to the PIANC USA. Prior to joining the Institute for Water Resources in 2008, Kevin worked for the Corps of San Francisco District for nearly 13 years, serving as team leader for the district's economic branch, as well as a specialist on deep draft navigation, plan formulation, and project management. Before I give the floor to Kevin, let me inform those who don't already know that we have a memorandum of understanding with PIANC, and that with the support of Ernesto Fernandez from the Secretariat, who is not here at the moment, and Kevin, we are trying to structure a work plan so that the committee can work with PIANC for the benefit of member states. So without further ado, Kevin, please, good morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias. Buenos días a todos. Como Jorge le había dicho, mi nombre es Kevin Knight y hoy soy un economista con el Cuerpo de Ingenieros Instituto para Recursos Hidráulicos. Por favor, perdóname, han pasado 25 años que estudié español, estudié español en la secundaria, pero estoy tratando de mejorar mi español. Compré una app para mi celular que me manda a practicar mi español y sueña a lo largo del día para recordarme que la práctica, especialmente durante la noche cuando estoy durmiendo, ring, ring, ring. So es muy importante. So yo prometo la próxima vez hablaré en español, pero hoy esta vez in English. So basically, thank you again for giving me this opportunity. I look forward to sharing my knowledge and stories with you. And more importantly, I'm looking forward to making new friends from all over the world, and so this is a great venue for me. When Ernesto sent me the title, Tourism, Inland Ports and Waterways, Services to Ships and Navigation, it's quite a title. There's a lot to cover. I will say that the Corps, given my background, I'm an economist. I do cost-benefit analysis. It's very important to do a good analysis of why it's important to deepen or widen or do breakwaters or other things at ports. And so tourism, from the Corps and from the federal government, the U.S. government perspective, isn't the primary mission. It really is commercial traffic. However, we do a lot of projects that benefit tourism, and then we use a term called recreation, which is like tourism. It's basically using the water for other purposes besides moving cargo. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the mission of the Corps. We're a large agency. We've been around for 239 years. We just had a big birthday, so it's 239 years old. So we really are one of the oldest federal agencies. So this is what we do. Again, we are designed to do water projects, engineering types of projects. Navigation was our first mission, besides the war stuff, but it was navigation in the early 1800s, and so Dr. Jones showed you there's 300 ports. There's actually 926 if you count the inland and other ports. So I don't know if you can see this graphic, but you'll get the slides. 926 deep draft ports. We've also do flood projects, and we built 14,500 miles of levees. We built dams and locks and dams to build hydropower, which is one of the, we have a quarter of the nation's hydropower, which is very important with the administration to use green energy. And of course, one of our increasingly common missions is ecosystem restoration, including helping restore the Everglades in Florida, which is a very internationally known place. And of course, we do provide, a lot of people don't know this, but Corps of Engineers has lakes, and we are the #1 federal provider of lakes that people can use. Okay. So again, our mission really is to provide safe, reliable, efficient, effective, and environmentally sustainable water. And in this order, commerce comes first. So when we do a project, we really have to show the benefits to the nation in terms of savings, the transportation costs. So what we do in the field, we would look at the cost of shipping goods from China to the U.S. and the dollars per ton we spend, and then we save that. And then without a project, of course, the cost and the inefficiencies and delays that continue to get worse as the ships get larger. Then we recalculate the benefits, we recalculate the cost with an improvement, with a deepening. And that really is the savings to the nation. Regardless of where the ships are coming from, we realize, or where the goods are coming from, the nation benefits from that. And I thought that was an interesting talk yesterday when they talked about alleviating poverty, because in the U.S. there's parts of the U.S. that exports are very important, like the coal mining areas or the agriculture areas. And so I think there's a disconnect. I think the public may not realize that how important it is, the water side investments. They don't really see. They see trucks and rails on land, but they don't realize that the investments we've made. So these days we have a big navigation system. The circles in blue are the deep draft ports. They're generally 14 feet or deeper, and they have their own rules. They have their own ways of the maintenance. We talked yesterday about the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund and how the money is collected at those ports. Well, the inland side is a little different. It's called the Inland Waterways Users Board, and so the yellow dots there, that's the system, basically the steps, as ships go up and down the river. And so we're very lucky. We have 2 large oceans and lots of ports around the Gulf, and of course the Mississippi rivers are really busy. That's where a lot of the agriculture, and again, we're proud of the jobs that we've done in the past. And so this is the system, the inland system. So you can see you got the Mississippi. You even have here up in the northwest where there's big drops. That's where the hydropower is, because you've got some very big drops and mountains and lots of rain and water. So that's a good spot for a lot of hydropower. But there's also a series of locks and dams up there. And so we're exporting stuff out to soybeans and things like that. Okay. So again, just some more statistics on the system. It's a huge system, lots of projects, locks and dams, and it's still running really well. We do partner with and Joan had talked about this yesterday. The Corps of Engineers, our mission is to do engineering projects, but there's other agencies we work with. MARAD is one of them with regulation and the ports. The Coast Guard, USCG is a Coast Guard. They're responsible for safety. They do the aids to the navigation. NOAA, they help, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They do a lot of the mapping and they handle the tides. We use them to look at the tide windows that people have, the shippers have to get in and out of the ports. And of course, other agencies on land, EPA, that's the Environmental Protection Agency, and you've got Fish and Wildlife and other agencies. So planning projects is very, very sophisticated, very complex. You have so many constraints to do, and it's why part of the reason why our studies take so long to finish, because you have the public, you have environmental groups, you have the business community, you have to get a lot of information and sort through that. We also have on the inland side there's a users board. They are meeting right now. The fund that we use to pay for those improvements is low. The tax has been set. It's been very low for 20 years. It's been set at the same. And the barges have gotten more fuel efficient, so the amount that they're collecting is not keeping up with the cost of maintaining the locks and dams. Of course, we work with ports, the AAPA, and other international organizations, PIANC. As Renee talked yesterday, we had a big conference in San Francisco. It's a great group. It's been around for over 100 years, I believe, and it stands for something besides that. It's actually a French term. And the IMO and the Dredging Association as well. So those, again, we have coordination at the national level and the international level. So how are things on the inland system? Well, it's still working, but it's getting very old. There's some locks and dams that are over 100 years old. They were built at a time, in the 1900s, 1920s. And so they're getting more expensive to fix, and we have been looking at the delays at the locks. So shippers might have to wait, the water takes too long to fill up, or they break down, and so they're not as reliable. And I should mention that, okay, there's 320 million people in the U.S. right now. By the year 2050, there'll be 400 million people, and so there'll be 14 billion more tons moving on the waterways. So things are getting older, they're getting more expensive to fix, and by the way, it's becoming more a constraint at the coastal side and at the inland side as well. So again, this is what we talked about yesterday. There's two different sources of funding. On the coastal side, the deep draft side, that's funded out of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund that the shippers pay into. And that was the pot of money that couldn't get used. It was used for other purposes. It wasn't going to the maintenance of the project. On the inland side, there's a trust fund. Some of it comes from the government and taxpayers, and the other comes from a fund that the users pay. And that is one that just isn't, they're not collecting enough to pay that. And so right now there's a users board made up of people from the Corps and the barge industry. They have been meeting to try to come up with some ideas on how to get more money, and so because politicians, the Congress, are the ones that say, okay, you can raise the tax. So, but every politician right now, including the president, says, no, we're not going to raise the tax. So they have to find ways of doing rehabilitating and things like that. Okay, so here's a website. I want you to check it out. It's called corelocks.com. It goes to the Corps. The IWR, where I work, is part of the Corps. They compile a lot of the data that we use. We send the data to Congress and to the public to show them, the importance of the waterways. But also for our analysis, we use this to say, okay, how long are the delays? How bad are the delays getting over time? And so here you can actually look at the performance of the locks, and you can sort and do queries and databases based on the vessel, on the tonnages. You can do different dates from this year to that, and so that's stored in there, and it's fairly current. It'll be an hour old, so if a ship is moving or a barge is moving through the lock, an hour later it will be, a public can see it. We have access to it live, but the Coast Guard and others said, no, we can't give you that current, but it can be an hour old, and so you can see, okay, this ship is going through here, and so try it out, play around with it. So that's the website, and if you could also go to the IWR website, which is where I work, Institute for Water Resources, and that's the homepage there. And so within our office, again, I do the planning and the cost-benefit stuff, but they have an office that compiles all the dredging information and the lock information and the tonnages and the amount of water that the ships need, because that's very important in our projects, to look at the benefits of the projects. This is really hard to see. Getting back to recreation vessels, we do count them. However, we count them as one recreation. If 50 kayakers go through the lock, that counts as one lock, one visit. So we're going to try to get better at counting the total number of people going through. But people can use them. You can go up and down the rivers on your own boat and go through the lock chambers there. So again, you can see it's a big part. The total vessels moving through the locks were 855,000 in 2010. About a third of them were recreation in nature. And then we can do it by district. This is important for us so that when we look at funding for the different offices in the regions, that they receive their amount that they get. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about tourism. Other things that are going on that users of the system, this is riverboat gambling. This happens a lot in the South, I think, in the U.S. It's maybe a more religious place where people don't gamble, but you can gamble on the water. So I guess that's how they make the distinction. It's okay. So you go and they gamble and drink and everything else. And so there's a lot of these riverboat cruises you can take, and they use the river system. We have steamboat cruises, just like it was maybe 100 years ago. This is the Mississippi Queen. And so you can see the luggage. I guess they're going to stay for a while because they have their luggage there. And then I found out about this. I want to go to this now. People in America, probably throughout Latin America too, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, the three ships that Columbus took, you can actually go on one of the ships. Now, you can't ride on it. They use the system to go up through the chambers, and you can see how old, I mean, it's amazing how they were able to get across the ocean in these boats when you see them. So there's two of them. I guess the Santa Maria is under water right now. Okay, some pictures here. I think it's in Haiti. I think that's what the story is. So anyway, these are pictures of people using the locks that we have. And again, it's a public good. So we have kayakers, and you have people with more money. They have these ships, and then there's dinner cruises. And of course, this is in Minneapolis, I believe. And they have races and other things like that. One of the things that our water projects, what we've seen in the U.S. and probably throughout your countries as well, is that more people seem to be moving to the water. As bad as the hurricanes are and the storms, people still want to live near the beach. Same thing with urban areas. We seem to be now building more near the water. And so if you have some time, you can take water taxis in Baltimore. There's a big harbor there, and you can go up and down. There's one here that takes you to the National Harbor to Old Town, although it's $14 a ride, so it's pretty expensive. But they have these throughout, and they're taking off. People are not driving. Younger people don't, they rather walk and take public transit, and so the taxis, maybe will come down in price. This is Baltimore. Here's the one you can rent there. There's a really nice aquarium there. The San Antonio's here, yeah, and they actually, you can't see it in the picture, but they colored the river green for St. Patrick's Day. I don't know if that's very healthy for the river, but it's pretty modified. But this is another thing that the other cities are trying to do. They're trying to use the water to attract tourism. That picture up on your right is a really fancy hotel. I think it's like the Royce Carlton Hotel or something like that. That's also in Baltimore. So, okay, so recreation. Now, I just talked to you about the Corps' mission. I talked to you a little bit about the inland system. I wanted to tell you what we're working on, that we can use the information from recreation and apply it to the value, not just the savings and shipping costs, but other kinds of benefits that our projects provide. So recreation, again, this is the largest, we are the largest provider of federal, more than the Park Service. We have lots of facilities, lots of campsites. It supports 500,000 jobs and $16 billion in spending. And surprisingly, more than 90% of the lakes are within 50 miles of a metropolitan area. So you can actually go to this website, and there's a lot of different agencies, but they'll be able to pull up. You say, I live in Alexandria, Virginia, and that's where I live. So I can call up where the nearest sites are, and they'll map it for me. They'll say which sites are available. So it's a great tool. I think it's, yeah. So recreation.gov. And so what it does is it takes all of the U.S. federal agencies, and they combine their websites, and then you can do a search for where you live, what you'd like to do, if you want to do water rafting, if you want to do this. So again, this is something that we're partnering with other agencies, and it's going to help, again, bring value to the investments we've made. And the public, again, they often don't realize some of these goods that we've done. Okay. All right, so I was going to go into at length. I actually stole this from someone I work with. He's the one responsible for building this model. It's called the Recons model. And now if those of you that work in the economics world, input-output modeling, this is a really useful tool. A lot of cities, when they decide, oh, we want to have the Olympics in our city, or we're going to build a stadium in the city, they use these tools to look at how much economic growth is that going to provide. So we're doing that the same way with our projects. And so one of the things we can look at is with a project, we can measure, again, money is going to come from all over the country into that area. And so you're spending money on the dredging, you're spending money on sometimes on the cement and the equipment, and then that money gets recirculated again and again. People spend that money. The construction workers working on the project then take their paychecks and they spend that money. And so we're able to trace that economic multiplier. And in fact, in some of them, again, if they're working more, you're paying taxes, we can measure the taxes that they collect from the labor and also from the sales tax, from buying goods. So anyway, this is one of the things that's taking off. We weren't really looking at it before. We were only looking at the impacts of the savings, the shipping cost. But there's lots of other benefits that our projects provide. And then once the project is built, there may be subsequent savings later on. Once the project, you may attract more businesses to the area. We see this a lot with our flood projects. You know, when it's a flood-free area, more businesses can invest and move to that area. And so again, we're adding this. We're allowed, you know, policy allows us to look at that. So this is just a list of the things that in a typical navigation program, you've got locks, you might have structural improvements, you have maintenance and O&M, the operation and maintenance. And so from there you can It pulls a lot of the data that's out there, the income and the population, and so there's other federal agencies that can collect that. And then it uses that data, and it gives you, you put in the dimensions, so I'm going pretty quickly, but you put in the kinds of materials that are needed for the project, how long the project's going to take, how much spending are you going to, and then they're able to calculate basically the economic returns. And this actually took off after Obama. When Obama took office, we had a stimulus, and we were trying to put money towards projects that have a big return that gave a lot of jobs. So some of the outputs of this, just get to it, is that it can show you how many jobs are created, both in the long run, short term and the long term, the income that raises in the area, in the region, in the state, the taxes, but we also added emissions. So sometimes development, again, it's a good thing economically, but there may be more carbon emissions that come with economics. So we're measuring that as well. There's a way of doing that. And again, it gives Congress more information, and it gives the locals, the public, again, they may not realize the savings, okay, I saved, 10 billion, the ships save this much money. Again, they see it as international or it's saving. They don't realize the savings to themselves, but there's other benefits like the projects. And so we're going to be using that. And so again, it was a long presentation, but the dredging has lots of benefits there, and we're doing that on the inland side as well. So what we're going to do in the future, let me just show one more slide, is that we're going to then take the work that we've done on recreation and the work we've done on this to start looking at the value of the inland system, and not just the savings and the delays, but the actual, the income and other things that are generated. So we may be surveying people. Sometimes people don't go into locks. They just stay on the river, or the gambling might just sit at the side. They're not moving. But, we are getting more creative. We're realizing it's important to show the data. And like I said, we talked about yesterday about data. Data can be your friend. We can find out more and more with the data that we collect in terms of where the benefits are, what works, when do we get big returns, one city versus another. And of course, there can be some land side things. It could be taxes, other things that are on land. It's not just if you deepen this channel, magically you'll have saving. There's other reasons that ships choose one port versus another. But anyway, again, the power of computing, data can be very, very helpful. So that's all I wanted to really share with you for now. We've got some more models and other stuff, and I could go on all day. But I just thank you so much for giving me this chance to introduce myself, and I look forward to seeing you again, and any questions as well. Thank you. All right. Oh, there's my information.
It doesn't matter. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. Again, are there any questions that Kevin might answer? I think that it won't escape your attention that this is a crucially important area of development for everybody sitting here. Number one. Number two, based upon that, you will remember that both river and lake ports and waterways were included in the Declaration of Cartagena and the Plan of Action of Cartagena, and they're also included in a tag as part of the workings of the committee. So they're now official workings of the committee, which is why the memorandum of understanding that we have with Piank comes into play wonderfully. There are countries with strategic interest in lake and river ports, such as Paraguay, for instance, or Bolivia, for instance. But then there's other countries like Mexico or Colombia who have done and are working in developing the transportation of El Rio Magdalena, for instance, in Colombia, as not only a main waterway for commerce, but also for some revenue with it. So this is an area that is definitely growing in our countries, and we'll get together with Kevin in the next few weeks to see if we can structure a plan or something. I was particularly interested on the models that you have, those planning tools, and I'm a firm believer that you don't need to invent the wheel, that somebody else has a good practice that you can learn from and adapt. And so this is what we will try to do and offer the members of the committee some options for you. So thank you very much, Kevin. Like we did yesterday, just stay at the table. I'm going to call my good friend Bo to come up here. Let's put this presentation up there. All right. Well, this is Bo Henderson from Mobilis, good friend of mine, Swedish chap, and fluent in Spanish as well. And I couldn't find your bio notes. So would you mind saying a few words first? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Actually, good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. It's always a pleasure to do any event with the OAS. My name is Bo Hermansson, Swedish name, but I'm born in Portugal, so I got lucky, I say. I've been working in the last 12 years in Latin America for the company Mobilis and CIP. CIP with lanterns, Mobilis with buoys. I continue working with Mobilis while at CIP I endorse their products because they're really excellent, but I'm no longer contracted with them. Right. Mobilis is founded in 1990 and is based on a gentleman who's been his third generation working with buoys. His grandfather was director of ports in the Mediterranean of France. His father worked for repairing lighthouses and buoys, and Jean-François Junier, the current gentleman in charge, is the founder of Mobilis. His idea was to manufacture a buoy which is much better to maintain with new products, using new materials, not just the old steel, but now a combination of aluminum, steel, and polyethylene allows for a very good, stable buoy with a good visibility. We work we're working also with data buoys, buoys for river. These are for high current, up to 16 knots, and mooring systems. The fundamental of our buoys is, can you move the slide? Oh, I have, okay. Wow, I have a pointer too.
Yeah.
How cool. Okay. Right, a little bit of the history. First lightweight and modular buoy. Modular meaning that if you need to replace a tower or you want a smaller tower or a higher tower, you can do that with the same structure. It also means you can replace. Espera, iba a hablar en español. Mayor parte son de español, así que puedo hablar en español, creo. Se puede reemplazar piezas de la boya que han sido dañadas. En 2006 se ha empezado a trabajar con boyas metroceánicas para temperatura de aguas y lo básico, en esa altura es lo básico, altura de marea, altura de olas. En 2010 empezamos con sistemas de gerencia de tráfico marítimo, o sea, DTMS, AIS, etc. Desde 2010 empezamos a trabajar con más tecnología más avanzada para boyas de datos científicos. Y ahí vamos con no solo temperaturas de agua, salinidad, conductividad, corriente a varios niveles de profundidad. Boyas de amarre, boyas de navegación y boyas de datos. Aquí tenemos varios tipos de boyas. Esta boya ya es solo ya no tiene una estructura en acero, es polietileno, la parte inferior, con un lastre de hierro hundido. Aquí la torre es en aluminio. Esta boya también es igual, no tiene el cigarro muy largo de acero, es en polietileno con un lastre. Y como ven, pues, tiene bastante estabilidad. Boyas estas más específicas para condiciones de hielo, esta en invierno. A veces estas boyas se ponen 5 metros bajo del hielo, o sea, el hielo sube 5 metros para arriba de este nivel. Y después tiene que resistir mucho a presión muy fuerte. Esta boya, Pillar Buoy, o different names, hay varios nombres para esta boya. Pillar Buoy articulada, es una boya con una ancla a fondo, no tiene cadena. Este tipo de boya no necesita mantenimiento, es muy eficiente durante 30 años, no necesita mantenimiento prácticamente ninguno. Esta es una boya que hemos recién puesto en San Andrés, en Cartagena. No, una en San Andrés y otra en Cartagena. Es un proyecto con temperatura, salinidad, vientos, para aumentar la seguridad de la navegación toda vuelta y también para tener información válida, importante de condiciones del mar. Aquí, Puerto de Marsella, nuestra sala de reuniones. Esto demuestra la estabilidad que tenemos en las boyas. Así que, y como ven, la boya es modular. Podemos poner con shackles, quick release, D-link, y de acuerdo a lo que el cliente necesita. También diseñamos un sistema total para embarcación, digamos, de hasta 500.000 toneladas, un sistema de amarre total, tomando en cuenta las condiciones locales que puedan haber. Como les hablé, la boya es modular, y esto es no solo la boya de navegación, pero todas las boyas son modulares. Y cada pieza que ven puede ser independientemente cambiada. A veces se rompe un flotador y aquí demuestra reemplazamiento del flotador. Una cuestión de 2 horas, la operación total. También muy fácil para limpiar. Esta boya sería lo equivalente a una boya de acero con 8 toneladas o más, en cuanto que esta boya son 2.300 kilos, lo que permite que una embarcación más pequeña, menos tripulantes, más rápida, puede hacer el mantenimiento. Un tema, en Holanda estamos trabajando mucho con la autoridad en Holanda, estamos reemplazando todas sus boyas de acero, han sido desde 2007, 9.000 boyas que hemos reemplazado. Y para ello es muy importante, no se puede subir la boya para hacer el mantenimiento. Lo pone la boya en la cubierta y a partir de ahí se hace el mantenimiento de la boya. Text. Okay. Aquí demuestra la embarcación, puede ser mucho más pequeña, 3 tripulantes es lo que es necesario. Torre tradicional puede ser reemplazada con esta torre de alta visibilidad. Esta es una torre más requerida hoy día. En Francia todas las boyas están con esta torre. Tiene un plan focal menor, pero se ve a más distancia, porque tiene más visibilidad, área de visibilidad arriba. La estructura en acero, galvanizado o con tratamiento de pintura, que tiene una resistencia de 30 toneladas de rotura. Y si la boya pesa 2 toneladas, tiene muy gran reserva de para la rotura. Sistema de amarre. Una boya no se debe considerar solamente una boya y después poner el amarre. No, se debe considerar totalmente una parte integral que es el muerto, la cadena y la boya, para hacer un sistema muy viable para las condiciones de mar que tienen ahí. Esto es un sistema calmar. Mobilis lo ha diseñado este software y la YALA ya está, o YALA has endorsed, lo recomienda para utilización para cálculos de amarre. Ayuda a elegir qué tipo de amarre, de 25, 30 o 35 milímetros para una boya en dichas condiciones. Eso se puede bajar en Mobilis, en la página web de Mobilis, ir a calmar y ahí tienen una herramienta muy interesante. VTS, AIS, muy importante para la seguridad. Por ejemplo, estas boyas están en el puerto de Ensenada, en Baja California, y ayudan mucho cuando hay niebla, se ven el canal, sin el AIS, que indica en el ECDIS cada posición de cada boya. No se veía dónde estaba la boya, se pasaba por arriba las boyas y se dañaban. Ahora ya se ve el canal de modo muy claro cuando hay niebla. Okay. Aquí estamos testando esto para Ensenada. No creo que tengan condiciones tan extremas ahí, pero lo testamos en las condiciones para ver si funciona. El AIS viene integrado en esta caja, que tiene una batería de 40 amperes, la linterna de Savic, Finlandia, antena VHF y adentro la antena de GPS para determinar la posición de la boya. We are members of Ayala, Cluster Marine, GCO, also Piank, and Lloyd's. River navigation, navegación de río, puede ser muy complicado. Principalmente hemos tenido consultas de Amazonas en Perú y ahí es muy difícil poner boyas o tener un sistema de navegación porque ahí pasan troncos de madera que le tornan muy difícil. Pero tenemos ideas y sistemas que pueden reducir los costos. No hay un sistema ideal para balizamiento de cualquier posición. Tenemos en el Mar del Norte de Escocia boyas que están en condiciones de 25 metros, 30 metros de olas cada semana. Tenemos en ríos amplitud de 10 metros y corriente de 16 nudos, hasta 16 nudos. Y siempre van desapareciendo boyas, pero siempre estamos intentando solucionar para reducir los costos de una autoridad en esas situaciones. Otro tema, vendemos mucho para el norte de Europa y ahí es muy fuerte el tema de reciclaje y el ambiente. Todas las materias que utilizamos son 100% reciclables, pero es un poco un problema porque mucha gente quiere flotadores con relleno en poliuretano, lo que es muy dañino al ambiente. Así que nuestros flotadores son más gruesos y no tienen relleno, a no ser que realmente insistan así que podemos poner relleno de poliuretano o tener boyas en el astómero. Pero no es nuestro tema favorito de hacerlo así, porque en Alemania, Francia ya no se puede utilizar, tiene que ser materias totalmente ambientales. Okay, thank you for your kind attention.
Like we did yesterday with the speakers.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Bo. Let me tell you all, which I forgot to tell you at the beginning of Bo's presentation, that Mobilis is an associate member of the CIP. So they are presenting as such, and it is important to note that all of the presenters of tomorrow are CIP associate members, either new, that they've managed to incorporate themselves, like Rightship and Anusha's back there, or people who have been joined in the last year. And so it's important, and I'll make that announcement. All right, well, this is an important issue because without boys, there's no navigation, as we all know. And I was particularly pleased to know about the river.
Just 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
I've left one of these with everybody. I think you'll see as my card, and it's a catalog of the buoys that we have. Okay, thank you.
And anyway, this is something that we all need, especially when, high traffic or recreational traffic and whatnot. In any case, thank you, Bo. And again, if there's any questions for Bo, I imagine that people would approach you individually for more technical and particular questions. With that said, I'd like to invite up front Mr. Richard Campbell. Richard Campbell is the chief of the section on culture and tourism of the Department of Economic and Social Development here at the OAS. And as Richard, I'm sure, will tell you, as you can probably guess, being in charge of tourism, the strategic sector, this is your clicker, they have a strategic interest in the cruise line and the importance of tourism for economic development and activity. And so with that, Richard, thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. And good morning to everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
Excellent. First of all, let me say thanks to Jorge and his team for inviting us in the Culture and Tourism section to participate in this important meeting. I think it gives us an opportunity to provide some perspective from the Culture and Tourism section on the importance of tourism in the Americas, and in particular, to have some perspective on the cruise segment of this. So in essence, my presentation would basically focus on the importance of the cruise sector in the Americas, looking at some of the data over the last 10 years or so, 8 to 10 years. First of all, I'll start by highlighting some of the major points with respect to highlighting the importance of tourism in the Americas in general, broadly speaking. And then I will going to zoom in a little bit on the cruise sector, identifying basically the five of the top cruise sector destinations, countries in the among our OAS member countries, and looking at some of the principal trends in the data that we've seen. I'll then go on to basically take a quick snapshot of do a comparison between the cruise sector and stayover visitors, and looking specifically at the case of Jamaica. I will then highlight some of the emerging issues with respect to cruise tourism, what we've been hearing from our authorities in the region in terms of what is keeping them up at night with respect to expanding with the cruise sector and these emerging issues. And then finally, I hope to end with some suggestions of why cruise is important to us here at the OAS, and also provide some suggestions for the cruise authorities and the cruise companies and the port authorities, and how they can contribute to the dialogue on tourism development in the Americas. If we jump right into it, I want to start first by looking at some data from the World Travel and Tourism Council, the WTTC. And according to this data, travel and tourism's direct contribution to GDP in the Americas reached around 700 billion in 2013. This is 700 with a B, billion. And when you include the indirect effects or the induced effects of the travel and tourism sector, this generated around 2.1 trillion, contributed around 2.1 trillion to gross domestic product in the Americas as a group. And when we look at it, this is about 8.6% of the total GDP for the Americas. So this is a substantial sector. This is saying that tourism is substantial and important for the Americas. As we know, for some sub-regions, for example, in the Caribbean, some of these countries, tourism represents upwards of 30% of GDP. So while it's 8% of GDP for the Americas, in some of the sub-regions, it's clearly more. The Caribbean is probably the most tourism-dependent region in the world, as we all know. With respect to tourism receipts, with respect to the arrivals, when we do the comparison between 2002 and 2012, we see that tourism arrivals were about 115 million in the Americas in 2002, and this accounted for about 16% of global tourism arrivals. So the Americas represents about 16%. That's in 2002. And when we looked at it 10 years later in 2012, while it grew substantially, the share of that market, the share of tourism arrivals was still about 16% of the total global tourist arrivals. However, with respect to tourism receipts, in 2002, total tourism receipts for the Americas was about 114 billion, or 24% of the world's total receipts. However, by 2012, even though the tourism receipts in the Americas had grown by about 86%, the share of tourism receipts, of the Americas tourism receipts, had declined from 24% to 20%. So basically, in essence, the Americas has lost market share with respect to the receipts from tourists. If any of you are thinking why, who we've lost market share to, the evidence suggests that we've lost market share to the Asia-Pacific region and Europe, essentially. Turning now to zoom in a little bit on cruise tourism. Cruise tourism is one of the fastest growing segments of leisure tourism. As the size of the ships have grown and the number of the ships have increased, new ports have been established, and existing ports have found ever growing ways of increasing the number of day visitors to these destinations. Based on some data that we've gathered from the CTO and the Caribbean Tourism Organization and the United Nations World Tourism Organization, the top 5 performers in terms of cruise arrivals in the OAS member states are Mexico, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Belize, and Barbados. I just want to caution here, however, this data does not include the U.S. and its territories. If we include the U.S. and its territories, we include the USVI and say Puerto Rico, then that group becomes probably the second most important and will be number 2 behind Mexico. When we look at, for the most 2 important countries here in terms of cruise arrivals, Mexico and the Bahamas, and we look at what's happening over the period, what we can see is that, for example, during the period of the recession, which was basically 2008, 2009, you see this is Mexico here. You see a fall off in tourism arrivals here. But however, with respect to the Bahamas, you see almost like a constant growth during that period. We're not exactly sure why there was a continued expansion, for example, in the Bahamas. But some of the experts suggest that because of the Bahamas' proximity to the U.S. originating ports for cruises from Miami and Fort Lauderdale, this could attribute to the continued growth. When we look again at some of the data, there's this dramatic decline maybe around 2008 to 2009 for Mexico. And I think we could perhaps safely assume that this decline was more associated with the H1N1 outbreak rather than anything associated with the recession. If we turn out to look at sort of like the contribution of cruise tourism in the economy, and here we looked at some data that we gathered from the FCCA, the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association, and looked at the contribution to the economy. The numbers suggest that cruise tourism is a significant contributor to tourism expenditure for these 21 countries in this study, but less so with respect to employment. If we look at the number here, it suggests that in these 21 countries, the total expenditure in cruise was around just under 2 billion. However, in terms of total employment, it's just around 45,000. So it's relatively less important as an employment contributor rather than as an tourism expenditure gauge. However, I must caution again that this data, which includes 21 countries, only includes, I think, 15 countries in the OAS, and excludes two important cruise tourism destinations, which is Mexico and Jamaica. And I think if we include those in the data, then tourism expenditure from cruise tourism for this group would perhaps jump to around 5 billion. That's our estimate. So it will more than double to the 1.99 billion that's there. When we were asked to make this presentation, one of the things we thought of doing was to do a sort of comparison between the performance of cruise tourism and versus the performance of stay-over visitors over a period, and to look and see if there was any discernible trend between the performance of both of these sectors across countries and across subregions. However, one of the things we came up, we basically stumbled because we couldn't find a complete data set, particularly with respect to tourism expenditures. And I think tourism expenditures for cruise for all the countries. So there was a gap in the data, and I think this is an area that we have to look at, and how can we capture more and more relevant data regarding cruise tourism expenditures for our countries. Looking at the chart, what we see is that stay-over arrivals grew steadily during the period. This is the stay-over arrivals. Right, a cruise, on the other hand, had experienced a rather sharp decline after 2006. What we've seen is that, and then the recovery began perhaps around 2010. And this suggests to us that at the height of the recession, which is around between 2008 and 2010, that cruise tourism appeared to be more adversely affected compared to stay-over visitors. And I think this is something that perhaps warrants a little more investigation. When we looked at Jamaica again, and we looked at the case of looking at tourism earnings from the cruise subsector and the stay-over subsector, it's not surprising that the slides follow the same, almost look identical to the previous pattern which looked at the arrivals. So basically, not surprisingly, the receipts from stay-over arrivals continued to grow steadily during the period, albeit at a slower rate after 2006, while receipts from cruise arrivals experienced a rather sharp decline after 2006. And the recovery basically somehow began a little later. Oh my. How do I get this back?
Click this, there you go.
Okay, yeah. However, the recovery started a little later at 2011 compared with when the arrivals started back to increase. So arrivals started to increase perhaps around 2010, but in terms of the earnings or expenditures, receipts from stay-over, that occurred at perhaps a year later. And we're not precisely sure, but this is something that we would like to examine a little further. We're not sure that Jamaica is necessarily representative of the performance of other countries with respect to how both cruise and stay-over visitors perform over the period, and perform in respect to the same sort of economic circumstances, which in this case we're looking at a period that encompasses this economic recession period. So this is something that certainly we would like to look at, and we think may be an interesting point for us. Turning now to look at some of these emerging issues that I talked about. Some of these emerging issues, when we speak to our authorities in the countries, these are the things that they highlight to us that are keeping them up at night or engaging their attention. And these are environmental concerns and how to increase local earnings from the cruise sector. How do we improve the managed sustainable management of our destinations, and the issue of safety and security. And I just want to touch very briefly on each one of these. If we start by looking at the issue of the environment, environmental concerns touch on issues such as overcrowding, due to the increasing size of these cruise ships on the urban setting and on the attractions in these destinations, as well as on port of call facilities and port of call infrastructure, and how these are able to handle waste disposal and waste treatment and sewage, etc. As we know, and the Port Authority officials will tell you, waste collection, and etc., represents a challenge for these port authorities, which have to collect the waste and treat it. And the question of how the port authorities manage this challenge and how they solve this, and the costs and financial implications associated with these issues, I think remain critical. But at the same time, I think this challenge provides an opportunity for the establishment of partnerships between the port authorities and the cruise companies to jointly address this issue together, because this is a matter that affects both of them. So we think this provides an opportunity, and it is certainly something that we would like to encourage. If we look a little further now on these other issues of increasing tourism earnings from the cruise sector and sustainable destination management, we think that both of these issues are perhaps tied together for the most part. When we speak to our tourism authorities, we hear that, the great challenge they have of increasing local earnings from the cruise sector and how best to embed sustainability into their destination strategies. And I think in the context of the lower average spending for cruise visitors relative to stay-over visitors, we think it's important that the issues of sustainability in a destination be sort of embedded at the same time while we work to enhance the local product, development of local products and services, and how to increase opportunities for the local communities to participate in the tourism product and to benefit from the cruise sector. And in this way, the locals get a chance to get more out of the tourism product and more out of tourism. And at the same time, you enhance the issues related to destination sustainability by involving all of these stakeholders in dealing with these issues of sustainability. In March of this year, actually, at the end of March, the OAS launched the Sustainable Destinations Alliance for the Americas, which is a multi-sector initiative for sustainable destinations in the Caribbean and Central America, for the most part, at the beginning at least. This initiative aims to improve the way tourism destinations in the region are managed by embedding sustainability into the day-to-day management of these destinations, and looking particularly at how do you track sustainability criteria and sustainability metrics over a period. The alliance, as was established, brings together public and private sector organizations, and it includes the OAS, the Caribbean Tourism Organization, the Central America Tourism Integration System, Sustainable Travel International, and Royal Caribbean Cruises Limited, who I think is represented here. Someone from Royal Caribbean is probably represented here at the meeting. Yesterday, okay. So they're part of this original alliance. We are just at the point now where we're going to select the 4 pilot countries to participate in this important project. And then Royal Caribbean Cruises Limited will select an additional 3, which they will finance. So during the first year, we will have 7 countries participating, 2 from Central America, 2 from the Caribbean, that the OAS will select, in addition to the 3 that Royal Caribbean Cruises Limited will select. So we'll have 7 countries in the sub-region participating in the project. But the hope of this project is essentially that we will start in the Caribbean and Central American countries, and then expand it to other sub-regions in the Americas, moving on to areas in South America, etc. Then looking at the final issue on safety and security, in terms of the emerging issues, As we know, safety and security is an issue for cruise tourism, and it's an issue for tourism in general. If you don't have safety and security in your tourism product, basically your product is shot. But safety and security for cruises is not only an issue from our perspective, it's not only an issue for the ships, but it's also an issue for the ports. As we have seen in some places, if there are attacks on visitors when they come ashore, cruise companies tend to drop these destinations as what part of their port of call. And then after these are dropped, the ability to sort of to recover to the levels where you were becomes so difficult and expensive. It often requires great strides in terms of the local authorities to improve the general infrastructure, improve the available amenities for cruise passengers, and how do you enhance the image of this destination so that you can attract these cruise companies to come back. And this is expensive and costly. So if you try to address these issues of security up front, we think it's perhaps a greater use of your resources. From the OS point of view, through the Tourism Security Capacity Building Program in the Americas, the OAS has been able to support efforts in member states to deter some crime in some of these tourism centers by enhancing the capacity of law enforcement officers, particularly tourism police and private security managers at hotels, basically, and providing public-private partnerships for the protection of tourism centers and recreational facilities. And this is basically done through the development of 2-day and 5-day training programs and workshops. And these are done in consultation with the local destinations and looking in particular, trying to incorporate some of the particular issues in each of these countries that we go to do these trainings. And so far, we have done several of these trainings in El Salvador, Jamaica, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, several cities in Mexico, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Peru, and Panama. I see that I'm getting the bell. So I'm just going to wind up. I think I'm coming to my last slide now. Yeah. Okay, so why is any of this important to us? First of all, the Culture and Tourism section functions as the technical secretariat for the Inter-American Congress of Ministers and High Authorities of Tourism, which is an important platform for the exchange of experiences and the development of tourism policy for the countries of the Americas. And in this context, we think involving the cruise sector and the port authorities in this public discussion and this discussion on public policy under this ministerial platform, we think makes sense, given the importance of the cruise sector, as I tried to show in the initial stages, to the travel and leisure in the Americas. The 22nd edition of the Inter-American Congress of Ministers and the High Authorities of Tourism will take place in Barbados on 3rd and 4th of September this year, under the theme, Tourism Competitiveness, an Essential Element of Sustainability. And in this context, one of the issues or one of the topics to be discussed at this meeting is the issue of cruise tourism, particularly looking at infrastructure and home porting. We would certainly like to be able to provide an invitation to the port authorities, officials, and those of the cruise companies to participate and to be part of this meeting, because we think it's an excellent opportunity, and we would, I'm available to anybody who wants to have a chat with me at any point after. Finally, Mr. Chairman, finally, yeah. One additional opportunity for involving the cruise companies and the port authorities in the development of public policy with respect to tourism, I think, could be through the participation of these in the Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CITOR. The CITOR is similar to the CIP, which is the authorities for ports, and it was established to coordinate the ministerial dialogue on tourism development, to identify multilateral opportunities and projects, and to identify opportunities for common policies with respect to tourism in the Americas. We think by joining the CITO as associate members, you'll have access to the tourism authorities, access to the tourism ministers. You'll also get additional opportunities for networking, and you'll also be able to contribute your technical services related to the tourism industry and in contributing that, be recognized for this contribution. Mr. Chairman, this is the end of my presentation. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Richard. As you can see, there is a strategic interest in this area of tourism and cruises, which just serves to complement all the other areas of the CIP. Richard and I, who happen to be good friends and colleagues, are going to sit down and explore the next few weeks, and if we could get your input on this, it would help us even more, to try and see how we can work together and spin off and support one another, because it is evident that we both have an interest in somehow improving or contributing to the improvement of the cruise situation, security, environmental processes, and so forth. The Secretariat would be happy, Richard, to send every Port Authority an invitation to the ministerial meeting and CITUR as you see fit. So whenever you think is ready, we would be happy to send that over to you. I believe that's an excellent invitation from Richard, and I thank you very much for that generosity and brilliant idea to make the ministerial meeting in Barbados open and to this delegation. I think that perhaps some will take advantage of it. With that said, we're running a little late, but I didn't want to leave without giving you the opportunity of asking our panelists a question. Hopton from the delegation of Jamaica, sir, please.
Thank you. Richard, you noted the growth in passenger arrivals and revenue in Jamaica since 2010. I'd like to suggest that is directly attributable to the establishment of a brand new cruise facility in Falmouth, Jamaica, which is a joint venture between Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines and the Port Authority of Jamaica.
Thank you. Thank you for that intervention. Yes.
Thank you, Houghton, indeed, because that helps the detailing. Anyone else? Comment or question for any of our panelists? If not, I'd like to give them a hand and thank you all for your participation this morning. Oh, I'm sorry. Just jumped the gun there too soon. El Salvador, if we could have a microphone for... And te recuerdo presentarte porque hay gente diferente hoy que ayer. Gracias.
Muchas gracias por la oportunidad. No quiero desaprovechar el panel y su conocimiento para preguntar. Aníbal Osorio, de la Autoridad Marítima Portuaria de El Salvador. Especialmente como funcionario de gobierno, nos interesa, tal como se explicaba ayer, llevar los beneficios de estas acciones a todos nuestros ciudadanos, nuestros conciudadanos. El tema que me interesa es el de la participación de los privados en las actividades de las políticas gubernamentales y cómo la economía ha resuelto los problemas de sostenibilidad en el tiempo, cómo obtener los recursos para asegurar que los programas se mantengan a lo largo del tiempo. Especialmente me interesa el punto de vista del economista. Muchas gracias.
I think I got it. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. There's actually, when we do a project, we have to partner with, after 1986, we were required to really partner with the private sector, with ports, in doing our studies and also in our projects. So in a port, and I forgot to mention before I move on, we are doing projects based on cruise ships as well in Florida, and that counts as commercial navigation, even though people may not count as cargo. But I just wanted to mention that. I forgot to mention that. But in doing these projects, we are increasingly having to rely on the private sector to partner to get the projects, to get the projects to cost share portions of the project, And the deeper the channels go, there's more of a burden on the ports in terms of the formula, the amount that. One of the things in terms of sustainability, and if you're talking about environmental sustainability, I know that in the Oakland Harbor in San Francisco, in the past when they did a project, there would be a lot of lawsuits and environmental delays, and the projects wouldn't get built because of the environmental, they were just, again, legal lawsuits. And what the port did differently was when they dredged from 42 feet to 50 feet deep, they decided to use that material that they scooped up and to restore an old airfield that had been, was an abandoned airfield. And so they restored wetlands, and when I'm finding out, I'm not a biologist, but wetlands are very important to the health of the ecosystem. They're sort of like the kidneys of the ecosystem. So when they did that, the project, there was fewer lawsuits, the project moved really quickly. It got everybody, the public, the environmental groups, and the private sector, and the project moved a lot faster. So, yeah, and the first time they tried doing it without that, it took 20 years to get the project built, and they lost their market share to Los Angeles, Long Beach. Some of the traffic just left, and the big ships went there. So when they did it this new way, that was an improvement just from the sustainability standpoint. Now, on the inland side, that's still a challenge. They're at the table. And in fact, some of the barge industry, they want to pay more, they want to make sure, but they also want to make the government be with them as well. So in fact, I think they're taking the lead. There's some crazy ideas, like maybe naming the locks, a Coca-Cola lock #1 or something, to come up with innovative ways to pay for or to use the locks as a toll. Right now, you don't. It's just really, in fact, it's a tax that people pay, and they report it. They don't just pay when they go to buy the gasoline. The barge industry, they basically report to the IRS, which is the agency that collects the taxes, and they say, okay, we used 8,000 tons of fuel, and here you go. And so, yeah, they're looking at improving ways of collecting money. But the private sector, yeah, they're increasingly being. And they're the ones demanding to be quicker. They're saying, look, this is taking too long. How can we do things in a smarter way? And in fact, Dr. Joan yesterday showed you the new WRDA, the Water Resource Bill. There's actually, Port of Miami, they are actually going ahead and doing their project on their own, and they're not going to go with the Corps of Engineers. They're not going to wait. And so they're taking a chance. They want to get reimbursed for that project, but they're because time is money, they want that project finished, so they're doing the study and they're doing the dredging of that channel, and then once we do our reporting, they're hoping that they're going to get the money back from Congress, and they're taking a risk when they do that. So there's a lot of answers, but I hope when you say sustainability, I think more of it for environmental. Yeah, it can mean a lot of things. Does that help you at all? Okay. Well, yeah, I can keep talking afterwards. I know we have time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I guess that there's the economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. And I mean, the ideal would be to have that triad all worked out. But it's a tough proposition, as he says. Anyone else? But in any case, you can approach him on the break in the afternoon and tomorrow because he's going to be around. So. In any case, does anyone else have a question or a comment for any of the panelists? In that case, now we'll give you guys a hand and thank you for your participation. Thank you very much. Thank you, speakers. So while the speakers leave the table, we are now at the point, we're a bit late in the agenda, but we're okay because I've just been advised that we have a missing speaker from the next panel, so that's going to make up for the time lost. There's no need to rush. We are about to start this first break, and then we'll have the last panel of the forum with corporate social responsibility and gender or women in ports. And I see Ambassador Moreno of the Inter-American Committee of Women seated back there, ready for her presentation. I'm going to take advantage of this to make a couple of announcements, especially for the delegations that will be reading tomorrow, and also a reminder to all our special guests and associate members that this afternoon's meeting, after lunch, is actually a closed meeting only for the delegations, only for the actual CIP members, because this is when we will address, certain issues that are just particular to the executive committee. So this afternoon, we'll miss you, but we'll see you tomorrow morning when we have the plenary of the CIP. And not only are you welcome to attend, but you're also basically the main stars on the program. On that note, a couple of delegations have approached me regarding let me rephrase that, a couple of chairs from the tags, from the CTCs in Spanish, from the tags, have approached me regarding the report that they have to do tomorrow. And what I'm going to ask everyone that is going to read, that is Andrew, for instance, and Meredith, for instance, and Uruguay and Argentina, and so forth, the heads of the tags, Mexico already knows, is that the idea tomorrow is not to read the report, because you've already sent it to us and we've distributed to all the delegations. So all of us have that full report. So the idea would be to be able to read a 15-minute summary of that, highlighting the main parts of that report, and I think that 15 minutes should be plenty. Again, the document itself for reference is available online, and you've all gotten them as well. And this is with the intention of making tomorrow's program flow as well today. I invite you for coffee. Should we meet back here? It is 10:40. Should we meet back here at 10:35? Should we meet here at 10:50, 55? We'll be fine. We take a longer break because we have that extra time. Thank you for your attention.